Good morning, sir. Today we are here to have a talk with Prof.Irfan Habib on historical methodology. Sir, I would begin with a very basic question. When did time become historical and how have we identified it and separated it from ahistorical time? And when did this process start in Indian context?
Well, time is by definition historical. By convention, this is divided. By one convention, when the human species evolved, and by a larger definition, not only Homo sapiens sapiens, but also the earlier hominids, Homo erectus in particular, they are treated as when they appeared, then in a sense historical time begins. Previous to that is considered geological. So you have geological periods. There is a further division then between prehistory and history. History by convention has come to be regarded as one based essentially on writings or at least on transmitted texts. For instance, Rig Veda and Avesta were not written down when they were composed, but they were transmitted through oral means and ultimately they were written down. So let us not say writing, but let us speak of textual sources, written and or textual sources. From that time, history is supposed to begin because that is the normal way in which historians professionally study evidence. Artifacts and so on, which are our only source for the earlier time was studied by archaeologists. So this is one division between prehistory and history. And then there is the intermediate period, proto-history, where archaeology and writing both are our sources. So these are actually divisions not based on logic, but based on professional limits. Where the archaeologist's work is basic, then it's prehistory or proto-history, and where the historian's work is basic, the study of textual sources. So naturally, history for different countries starts from different times, different starting points. There is no single historical time for the world.
Sir, you mentioned about Rig Veda and Avesta and also about archaeological evidence. So, in a way, it is expanding the scope of core historical study, the study of the text. So, does that in any way makes the subject of history vulnerable to be infiltrated by myths or suppose not ahistorical information or data or something of that sort?
Actually, there is nothing in the Rig Veda or Avesta which should create myths. They are of course beliefs in gods and goddesses in the Rig Veda and belief in God and angels in the Avesta. Right? As you know, Zoroastrianism was an Indo-Iranian religion because of its influence on Judaism and then through Judaism and Christianity and Islam, then it's practically one of the Semitic religions. So there is no reason why these texts should introduce myths. Actually, detailed myths develop later. They develop, for instance, in all languages: Sanskrit, Persian, Arabic, Greek. They develop. In some civilizations, they are regarded as myths, as for instance the Greeks. Um, in some civilizations, there came to be large-scale beliefs in myths as well. For instance, in ancient India, in Indian present civilizations around Muslims who always believe in Noah's flood and all the stories in the Quran and all that. They don't regard them as myths. So religion gets up mixed up with these traditional accounts, and so it may be really the separation of myth, the use of myth as history may be a very late development.
Sir, what is your view on the new trends that have developed in recent times in historical writing, like postmodern, subaltern, counterfactual?
You see, the basic fact in history is that there are two levels. One level is of facts, what Carr calls historical facts, but the word facts is enough. You establish facts, which include, of course, ideas and as well as events. You establish facts by methods which can really be called objective and scientific up to a degree, or some others call them quasi-judicial. That is to say, you examine events, evidence, and those sources are primary, which are close to the event in space and time. You examine the language to establish when this was written. So there are many allied disciplines which are like linguistics, archaeology, and numismatics, and so on, which help us to establish facts. But if you have established facts, you then enter two kinds of difficulties in history. Either the facts are few and large areas are uncovered, so there is room for speculation. That's what in ancient India, let us say, Maurya Empire, little do we know about Chandragupta, and many assumptions about Chandragupta are based on Ashokan inscriptions. What the Maurya Empire was like during Ashoka's time. So there is large room for speculation. And then the other, that the facts are so numerous that there can be a large number of credible interpretations by assembling one set of facts. If you are dealing with not millions but billions of facts, let us say, today, then a large number of interpretations from the same facts, scientifically and objectively established, that are possible. And therefore there is room for interpretation. Postmodernists, so-called, question the validity of merely establishing facts and by studying causes and consequences, interpreting history. You know that the word postmodern came from architecture. A dislike among architects of postmodern symmetry. So history is asymmetric. You cannot have a single pattern. But then, of course, postmodernists got divided into a large number of trends, and several trends call themselves postmodernists without a particular. So they established symmetries like the subalterns, for instance. Others had little to do with subalterns, like the namierists, the postmodernists, like the namierists. Most of these schools attach different weights, let us say, different facts or different kinds of evidence. For instance, namierists prefer private documents to public declarations. Studying of personal interests to public welfare, politics, or visions. Uh, Subalterns argue that uh, elites, in their definition, elites are those who are Western educated, don't make history. It's the more primitive communities after they were poverty, so forth, and the kind of mystical inheritance of revolutionary ideas that make history. So all these arguments are contestable on the basis of evidence and facts, but some so-called postmodernists, when they reject the whole method of history, then of course it's very difficult to contest. One example, for instance, is Edward Said in Orientalism, because he seems to contest the use of scientific method by persons who are not themselves Orientals. I mean, that's that.
Sir, you mentioned two set of problems that come when we talk about facts. One is scarcity and the other is abundance of facts. So these schools of thought, like subaltern or postmodern, they, despite their emphasis on the absence of truth, like the idea of truth, they have still brought forth some of the suppressed historical schools, like the study of social history or economic history. For example, you have been working on economic history, which was not a field of study prior to your endeavors in
Economic
Kuwait.
history is
Not a very
I have nothing to do with either subalterns or postmodernists. The Marxian doesn't belong to these people. It is difficult to say whether they have added another.
contributed or not. So basically, that is the
So
question.
they have added, it's difficult. I mean, I don't agree that they have added any other factor which was not studied before. Most tribal studies, ethnographic studies, are quite known. They are far more realistic. What subalterns have added is a mystical element, that subaltern communities inherit kind of revolutionary tradition, which of course is a very dubious proposition.
So there is this one set of problems raised on theories, and there's another set of problem that we see in our country today. For example, the revision of textbooks, the distortion of history, and the recent popular trends of revision of history to suit political motivations and its representation in general media. So, how do academicians like you should tackle this? Because you have been tackling these kind of
This is a
for long time.
worldwide problem, and practically found in the historiography of a number of countries, not only India. It derives partly from a kind of reactionary nationalism in which you want to attribute every achievement to your own country. It has happened in many countries. Or to your own religion, or to your own civilization. For instance, take Muslims. They have always called their medical system, Yunani, but now they want to call it Arabic. As if by calling it Arabic, they will deprive Greeks of establishing a scientific system of medicine. So just by using inverted comma, by changing names, you don't do anything. But this is an example. Now, similarly, in our country, we have now we now claim all kinds of discoveries that are very annoyed if somebody says that no, this was discovered. Pythagoras' theorem was discovered in Greek civilization, earlier Chinese civilization, and not in India. So these kinds of things have existed, long existed, but now because of the BJP government and because RSS has always furthered this kind of nationalist myths, I would call pseudo-nationalist myths, they are now trying to put this into textbooks. And there is also a kind of anti-Muslim edge to it, by which they want to change political history or the medieval period. Of course, you can't change history. It's not like changing the train program. Once an event has happened, you can't change it. So, but you can believe in a wrong thing and that they are promoting.
Sir, since we are talking about history and historiography, at Aligarh we have a specific school of a specific tradition of history writing. Sir, in your memory, when did this Aligarh historical tradition begin, and how has it grown since its inception?
I don't agree that the way you judge the performance of any place, any institution, is how much it conforms to the scientific and objective approaches. Our founder himself, when he wrote his book on Delhi monuments in the 1840s, then he was doing something which was not in the historical tradition at all. That was totally developed in antiquities. Study of antiquities was not a part of historiography in India or Asian countries apart from China. So this came from the West. But in the same book, he wrote Taskiras, biographical notices, in the second part, which is the traditional historiography. So this is a combination. Now, of course, he had nothing to do with Aligarh at that time, so Aligarh can't claim anything on it. Most of his historical works not connected with Aligarh or the establishment of Aligarh College. But when the Aligarh College was established, it promoted an anti-theological approach. I wouldn't call it secular, but anti-theological. Loyalist, written, but anti-theological. And this led to a very interesting development in late 1910s, and that is around 1916 to 1920, when a number of works of Amir Khusro were published. They were very well edited with very good introductions. In case of his supposed Hindi writings, the introductions are wonderful. They are written by two editors who knew Sanskrit and Brahmanda, had very good knowledge of Hindi sources. Then the first professor of history, the last in MO College and the first in AMU was Vanekar. was a famous historian who wrote Sri Astrology. Um, Subsequently, in 20s and 30s, uh, there were two streams actually. One was what I would call nationalism. Another was developing the kind of tradition that the publication of Amir Khusro's works had created. Study of sources of history, directly based on historical sources. This was quite important because most of the writing on medieval India previous to that was based on Eliot and Dawson. Eliot and Dawson's problems. Now it's a monumental work, undoubtedly, and all credit should be given to Eliot and Dawson, particularly Eliot, for his scientific approach and rational approach. But many sources still remained, and Eliot and Dawson had only done produced selections, translations of selections. So that particular approach came here. Now, if you look at Professor Muhammad Habib's Mahmud of Ghazni, you will find that it is only based on translations. It's an early one. It's basically an interpretation. It's still based on translation. He knew Persian very well, but he didn't go through the Persian sources for this. It's purely a nationalist interpretation, I would call it, of Mahmud, placing him in the context of the Iranian Renaissance. But then he himself turned to Persian sources, translating Fadail al-Futuh of Amir Khusro, which was also printed, and encouraging all his students to read Persian sources directly and write PhD thesis on it. Unfortunately, the published work that came out of Aligarh was not very good. 30s and 40s, mainly it was teaching and PhD research and papers, oriented conference of history scholars. This was a curious situation at that time that many regarded teaching far more important than writing, like my own teacher, Professor Sheikh Abdul Rashid, whose knowledge of Delhi Sultanate period was immense. He had studied almost every Persian source and was in fact editing. From 1953, another element entered Aligarh, and that was resources. Before that, resources were few. But in 1953, the government of India gave a very large regular grant because it was felt by the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru at that time that medieval India was not being adequately studied, and that actually many universities had omitted medieval India because they had now departments of history where only modern history was taught and a separate department of ancient Indian history and culture. And he not only resisted that tendency through his education minister Bulletin, but also gave this huge grant. At that time, looking at government of India's own resources, the money generally available for this program. To build up the library, to issue publications, to have research programs, all the three were looked after by this program. And then in 1968-69, it was identified as a center of advanced study in medieval Indian history by the UGC. Theoretically, grants should be no problem. Um, and I think, as in all other centers of learning and throughout India, there were interests in 50s and 60s at new kinds of approach, the Marxists, represented by Kausan B and Ramsharan Sharma, um, and others. That influenced my own work. The agrarian system of Mughal India was influenced by the Marxist approach. Although before writing it, I had read neither Kausan B nor Ramsharan Sharma. Those books had come out in 1955. But then, their writings began to influence. Then there was also the influence of nationalist historiography based on objective sources. And the concentration, unfortunately, was basically on medieval, except for archaeology, which Professor Nulasan and Professor Arfi developed. Yeah. But as far as teaching was concerned, much attention was then paid to all periods of Indian history and also world history. Because you can't understand Indian history or put things in the context if you don't know what was happening in the world around. So that was very essential, and I think until very late that was followed. Now it seems to have weakened. One advantage also was that there were foreign students, African students in particular, who used to come and realized that Africa was also part of the world and its history was important. Unfortunately, that Modiga has lost because of a foolish admission policy by the foreigners are not interested. So I think those are the reasons where, when you look at published work in 60s and 70s and 80s, are quite impressive, compared to earlier decades. But they don't conform to any one particular school or one particular line of interpretation. For instance, my friend Professor Atharedi and I disagreed on almost everything, and yet we both published. So, then there was also an emphasis on quantitative history, statistical, so there was an attempt to take up modern methods of historiography, not only theories of history but also methods of historiography, in which quantitative analysis is playing an increasing role.
So just one last question since we have come to start talking about Electoral and Influences historiography in its absence rather. Because you in your last answer came up to say 90s or 80s in Aligarh and just study of history in Aligarh. So what is your since you've been a witness at the department, so what is your opinion about the research that has been carried out in present times, and what areas should students pursue in order to be more productive in the field of history, productive for the subject?
Of course, depends on each individual scholar's interests. But I would argue that, first of all, knowing the language of the sources and directly going to sources is very important. Unfortunately, not only knowledge of Persian, but you will be surprised knowledge of Sanskrit is limited. I don't know the present situation, but some years back the epigraphy branch of the archaeological survey was not only not getting people who could read Persian and Arabic inscriptions, they were not getting people who could read Brahmi and Kanoshti and Tamil Brahmi inscriptions. So there is a surprising uh, lack of specialist skills in the country. You can see, for instance, that forget about Aligarh, but look at inscriptions. More inscriptions were published in better scientific fashion before 1880s than is now the case. Even when they are published, the editing is bad often. The translation unreliable. The Epigraphy Indica has practically ceased publication, and the Journal of Epigraphic Society all depends on one person, and even then, its quality is very uneven, but at least it is continuing. It also publishes Arabic and Persian inscriptions. But this is an example. So, first one should be very well up in the sources. Whatever period you take up, and also then take a subject which is meaningful. And will add to knowledge. Much of the research today in this country is like the speeches of American congressmen. The Speaker of House of Representatives said at that time that they can't open their mouth without deducting from the sum total of human knowledge. So, if you write a thesis in which facts are wrong, then you are actually deducting from the sum total of human knowledge. You are not actually doing it. So it's all a matter of substance, which one should. But research can't progress if our linguistic sources also remain limited.
Thank you so much, sir.